connect with your purpose and your mission. What impact do you want to have on the world with your service? And ask yourself, if I share my story with more people, is it going to have a positive impact on the world? And if the answer is yes, then move forward.
I'm Melanie Barr. Welcome back to the She Built It podcast, your go-to place to empower you to live the life and business that you crave. I'm here to talk about everything from having the courage to make life and career leaps to the details of how to lead effectively, create successful teams, implement strategies for growth, and infuse tech innovation. I'm here to celebrate your wins and navigate through your challenges. I live in the city now, but I grew up in a town of 1,000 people. I've navigated major life leaps, a senior level corporate career, worked in professional sports, and now as a successful entrepreneur who loves business, technology, family, and making meaningful connections with you and the She Built It community. I also love a good workout and dose of self-care. Magic happens when we focus on the part of ourselves and our business that brings us joy. So turn up the audio, open your favorite notes app, grab your favorite drink, and here we go. Welcome back to the She Built It podcast. Thank you for joining us, Jessica. You are the founder of Interview Connections. What inspired you to start your business in 2013, especially since podcast booking agencies didn't exist at the time?
Really, what inspired me to start my business was I was a new mom. I wanted to be home. Like that was it. That was my motivation, is I wanted to be working from home with my baby, who's now 11, almost 12 years old. I started doing work for my dad, who's a business coach and has had a newsletter marketing company for a long time. And so when I talked to my parents about wanting to be home when the baby came, my dad told me about being a virtual assistant and how being a virtual assistant is being a business owner. It's having your own business and having your own clients. And so he became my first client, and he asked me to book him as a guest on podcasts. And that's really what got me into it, is he asked me to book him on podcasts. And so I started Googling and finding business podcasts to book him on. And as I was reaching out to podcast hosts to pitch my dad as a guest, they had never been pitched before, which as a podcast host, I'm sure you get lots of pitches all the time from people that want to be on your show. But 11 years ago, this was not really a thing. People were not booking podcast interviews. So I started getting interviewed on podcasts, and I don't know if perfect storm is the correct metaphor, but the stars were aligning. I was getting on some shows, I was booking my clients, and I saw this opportunity. And that's what inspired me to start Interview Connections.
I love that. And I did not know that it started with your dad and booking him on shows. That's so interesting.
Yes. And that is why I love doing podcast interviews, because you and I have known each other for years, and stories come out that just would not have come out otherwise.
Yes. And I've had a lot of guests come from Interview Connections. So thank you. How did you navigate the early challenges of creating a business in a brand new industry?
Yeah, that is definitely the $1,000,000 question, because there have been so many different challenges. So my dad is a business coach, and having him as my coach in those early days was everything, because there was so much that I didn't know. Online business, entrepreneurship in general was such an unknown landscape to me. My background was working at a nonprofit. So I had worked my way up at that nonprofit and was a great leader and knew how to lead a team. But to have my own business where there was no existing HR department, there were no systems in place, like I had to create everything, it was totally unknown. So really in the early days, I followed my coach, my dad's advice to a T. He would guide me. I ended up investing in his business mastermind group. So I joined his business mastermind group, and then other business owners in that community would give me advice, give me guidance. I had listened to business podcasts. I was a sponge. That is ultimately how I navigated the challenges early on. And then over time, it was really about learning to trust my own intuition of how do I deal with these challenges I've never dealt with before. And so that was really how I navigated, is like having a coach and then learning to trust myself.
How lucky for you that your coach was your dad. That's amazing. And then when you think about email marketing, that's still a main thing today. And to have that advice early on, I'm sure was so helpful.
For sure. There was so many things. One of the first things that my dad advised me to do was to go to, it wasn't called a podcast conference. It was called the New Media Expo. Now there's podcast conferences, but back then it was the New Media Expo. And he said, go ask a question in the breakout sessions, because when you ask a question at a conference, you typically get to, hey, I'm Jessica Rhodes, founder of Interview Connections. And then you ask your question to the speaker, but that gets you visibility. So he taught me how to find these opportunities for visibility. And so many people leave those opportunities on the table. They don't step up and get uncomfortable to find that visibility, and going to conferences, going to breakout rooms, asking questions, building connections, building relationships. One of my clients said, oh, one of my friends is going to be at that conference. I'll have him connect you with some people. And then his friend introduced me to Mike Stelzner, who's the founder of Social Media Examiner. And then Michael Stelzner became my client. So it was leveraging connections and relationships and putting myself out there in any possible way that I could.
And asking a question of the speaker is good advice for today's podcasting conferences too.
Oh, yeah. That is this little hack that I think everyone should leverage, that not people leverage it enough. They're like, I want to be a speaker. I'm like, you can just go ask a question. There's a microphone in the audience.
So true. Over the years, your team has booked over 30,000 podcast interviews for clients. What do you think makes podcast guesting such a powerful business tool for growth?
Relationships, visibility, content. When you're a guest on podcasts, you have this unique opportunity to share your story and share value that may not come out if you're just creating your own content. I make a lot of content on my own. I recorded some videos today, put them on social media. But when I get on a podcast like this, you ask me, how did you start your business? And then I share this story and you're like, oh, I didn't actually know that, because I'm not making these short form videos on Instagram being like, here's how I started my business. Like I might do it once on my own platform, but then not again. But then when you guest on somebody else's podcast, you introduce yourself again and again to audiences, to listeners who don't know you yet. And it's so important to remember there's so many people who don't yet know us. There's so many people who know us that don't know our whole story. So it puts yourself out there, it raises your visibility, and it really allows you to hone in on your message. And this is where I think a lot of business owners who have been in business for 5-10 years plus, they're like, oh, I've already made the content. I know my message. But then when you constantly get out there and you're being interviewed, you find ways to explain what you do. You find ways to explain the benefits of what you do in new ways that resonate with people differently and more effectively.
That's so true. And it's so good to learn what someone does, but you also say things in a podcast that make you relatable. Maybe you're a mom juggling a lot of things. Maybe you live in a certain part of the country. Maybe you work with a certain type of business owner. That resonates with someone and makes someone say, I want to work with you.
Yes. And just allowing people to hear your personality, hear the way you speak, hear what stories you share. Typically, also in podcasts, you're getting little tidbits about your personal backstory that might not be in your professional bio on LinkedIn or on your website. And so I always think that's really great to share as well. It just came out through my story that I am a mom and I have an 11-and-a-half-year-old son. I'll drop also that I have a daughter. There's aspects that a mom entrepreneur might be like, oh, cool. Like she also has kids. Just these little touch points that allow the listeners to find ways that they can connect with you.
You help entrepreneurs who feel like the best kept secret gain visibility. What advice do you have for those who are hesitant about putting themselves out there?
This is such a great question because so many people are hesitant about putting themselves out there. And so many people are hesitant that don't realize they're hesitant because the hesitancy is masked by things like, oh, my message isn't perfect, or, oh, my lead magnet isn't ready. There's all these excuses of just, no, I'm fine getting visible. I just have all of these like real reasons, right? And then there's people that are like, no, I'm just actually really self-aware that I'm scared about getting visible. So whatever it looks like, so many people are resistant to that visibility. And I find that there's a spectrum of things that people are afraid of. Number one, I've heard people like really afraid of, what if I get so many leads, I can't handle it. I don't have the infrastructure. I don't have the sales team. I don't have the ability. And then there's people that are afraid that they don't get any leads. What if it doesn't work? And so people are afraid of the success and they're afraid of the failure. And so then they just don't move. My advice is to say, connect with why you're doing what you're doing. Connect with your purpose and your mission. What impact do you want to have on the world with your service, with your business, with your message? And stay connected to that. And ask yourself, if I share my story with more people, if I get visible, is it going to have a positive impact on the world? Is it going to have a positive impact on the people that hear me such that they would find me and my business and ultimately help them? And if the answer is yes, then move forward. If there's something that scares you, your sales funnel needs to be improved, you're not getting enough leads, like all of that can be figured out once you're actually on the court. Play the game. There's no crystal ball. Like you won't be able to know exactly how it's going to go. But if you want more visibility, you just need to step forward in faith and then figure it out as you go.
People have all different kinds of reasons. And even I'm sitting here listening to you. I keep saying, oh, in 3 months, I'll be on podcasts. In 6 months. I've produced a weekly show for 5 years and talk to people all over the world all the time. I have twins and they just turned 11. But I keep saying, oh, when they get a little older, I'm going to go on podcasts. You're inspiring me. And it's interesting to think through the reasons why we don't necessarily do it.
I was a guest on a show called Trauma Rewired, and we talked about nervous system regulation because ultimately, when you get visible, it will create change. And ultimately, it should create good change. There's more leads and more clients and more visibility. But what I've learned from Elizabeth Kristoff, who runs a company called Brain Based Wellness that I'm a client of, and she's worked with Interview Connections, she's always talks about how change is inherently threatening to the nervous system because your nervous system isn't really thinking of the big picture. Your nervous system isn't really connected with the future and the planning. It's just like change, scary. It's really important to find ways to calm your nervous system, to get grounded, to remind your body and your brain that even though this is going to bring about change and there's going to bring about more people are going to learn about me that didn't know about me before. Some people might not like me. A lot of people will. It's okay. It's safe. I'm going to be able to handle it.
With so much experience in matching guests with podcasts, what qualities make someone a compelling guest?
Yeah, storytelling is a huge part of it. I did a post about how podcasting is edutainment, and I did not coin that term. I don't know who did, but I quote it because it's a perfect way to explain what makes a good podcast and what makes a good podcast guest is that you're both educating the listeners, they're getting value, they're learning, they feel like their mind is enriched and they're feeling a little bit entertained. And this is why people listen to podcasts and not just sit down and watch TV. TV, you just veg out, you zone out, you just disassociate from the world. But when you listen to a podcast, you're listening because you want to learn. You want your mind to be engaged. You want to get value from it. You want to walk away feeling a little bit better than you did before you hit play. When you hit play on Netflix, you're just like zone out. But when you hit play on a podcast, you're like, I want to learn something. What can I learn? How can I be entertained from this in a way that makes me feel connected with the people on the podcast? So storytelling, work on your tonality, like how compelling can you be in the way that you deliver what you're saying, because while there is a video portion to a lot of podcasts now, most of the audience will listen on audio only. Most people are going to hit play on Spotify, on Apple. There's not a video element. So think about how you're delivering your words, think about the stories you're sharing, and then know when to stop talking. Know when to put a period at the end of your sentence so the host can talk.
Such good advice. I was also going to ask, if someone has a knowledge-based podcast, how do you recommend that they bring in the storytelling too? Because as a mom, I listen in the morning and I want that quick knowledge. But it's interesting to think of weaving storytelling in with the knowledge.
That's a great question. There's so many different types of podcasts and topics where not every show may be set up for stories, but the whole point of stories is to show versus just tell. Facts tell and stories sell. So giving the information, but the stories are what create the emotional connection. The emotional connection is what gets people to actually want to invest. Finding ways that you can create an emotional connection. Stories are a great way to do that. But if there's not really a story to share, like how else can you do that?
Tell us about some of the most memorable success stories or transformations you've witnessed from clients who embraced podcast guesting.
Yeah, in 11 years, I've seen a lot. And some of the highlights that spark, and when you ask that question, is two people that we connected for a podcast interview many years ago, maybe like 2015, ended up starting a whole business together. So we booked the interview and then they hit it off so much, they ended up launching like this huge company that ended up going into a 7-figure business. So that was like, oh my gosh, like we were the matchmaker. We brought them together. So that is really great. I've seen clients that we book the interview and then they just become best friends. They become accountability buddies. They meet on a weekly basis. We're like, we were the matchmaker to that business bestie friendship. So those are some really fun stories. And then there's the financial like success stories that are always very fun. Oh, I got a 6-figure client from this podcast, or one of our clients, the host booked him as a paid speaker at his conference. The success stories that excite me range from people becoming best friends, starting businesses together, just getting clients, speaking opportunities. Like it ranges, but I love it all.
And it must be really fun to hear those. I love it when I get a text message, a piece of positivity today. It helps you to keep going.
Yeah, it makes me so happy. And also, I love the client success story. They started with us and they were so new and so green in their message. They were trying to figure out how to explain what they do. And now, like a year in, they're just crushing it. And there's all this stuff happening in their business. And I don't take credit, but I feel great knowing that we were a part of their story and that we supported them through that.
Running a business, being a parent, and still finding time for personal pursuits like sauna sessions and background chickens sounds like quite the balancing act. How do you make it all work?
Oh my goodness. My Google Calendar is how I make it all work. Everything is scheduled in so specifically. That's really it. Communicating with my husband about who's doing what. We've had like a babysitter or nanny that's helped us out a lot over the last year. Your kids' age, like I'm sure they're doing like activities or sports where they have to, it's like we need like Uber.
I joke that I'm the Uber sports driver starting at or 4:30. But thank God for hotspots because I can sit outside the practice with my computer in a hotspot and still get things done. And sometimes that's even better because I'm in the car and no one can bother me.
You have to get creative with like when stuff gets done. Okay, I need to leave. I need to shut my computer at 4:30 and go drive my kids around. But then from 7 to 9, they're at their sports and I have this quiet time. And so getting creative and actively resting, like finding those times where you can do the self-care. I have a personal trainer, so I know at least once a week I've got someone that's getting me to lift weights and tracking how heavy the weights are. And I'm okay, making progress. So it's just a very busy season of life as you are in as well. And just scheduling all of the essentials in, finding ways to do self-care amidst a very chaotic season of life.
And I don't think scheduling in self-time, we all have to do that. And if we're busy, we have to schedule it in. So we make sure we do it. But once it's scheduled, then you can do whatever you want with that time.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Please share with us how and where we can find you and for anyone interested in podcast guesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Our website is interviewconnections.com. And I'm sure you'll put in the episode description or the show notes. I know you have a link where people could get in touch with us. We have a podcast interview prep checklist. We do free masterclasses. So I would say just go to the link in the episode description so your audience can reach out. And that way I know that y'all heard about me on this podcast.
Thank you for joining us today. I'd love to hear from you. Reach out to me at hello@shebuiltit.com on our She Built It website or at She Built It on social. Thank you to my editor, Rich Streffolino, who always makes us sound good. Until next time, let nothing stop you from experiencing the life and business that you crave.